Yo, what is up? It is your boy Zether, back at it again with a brand new video. Now, as you guys can see from the title, this is going to be What If Deku Was Like Syndrome from, you guessed it, The Incredibles. Now, I pretty much was just watching The Incredibles movie when all of a sudden I was like, yo, has anybody else done this before? So I just scoured the web and I was like, nope, no they have not. As you know, from there I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and do it myself. As you know, this is pretty much why we're here now. So with that being said, guys, I hope you guys are ready to watch this amazing series. But with nothing else to say, let's just go ahead and get started. Alright, so where we're actually going to be starting our story off is when Deku's essentially at the quirk doctor being told that he's gonna be quirkless. Deku's hopes and dreams would be crushed right there, as Deku would just drop his All Might toy, as he would look towards his mother and ask her if he can still become a hero. As at that moment, Inko would just stay silent, as she would just start crying, and the quirk doctor would look at Deku as, you know, he would say that he's sorry. As this time it wouldn't be the Dr. Ujiko, it would be a different one, somebody who's much nicer and kinder, as he would tell Deku that he can become a hero, he just has to try hard enough. As Deku would look up towards the doctor, and Inko would look towards him, as she would give him a smile, as Deku would say, thank you. As this is when Deku would go home and begin to watch the All Might videos just like he did in canon. And when he asked his mom once again if he can become a hero, she would still break down into tears and run up to him, telling him that she's sorry. I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different. I really do. As Deku would just sit there and cry, having no other option but to sit there and just take it. Now, this is when Deku would go to school, and after a while, he would proceed to essentially just be there, just taking all the bullying from Bakugo and taking all the repercussions of being quirkless. As this is when Deku would decide that, you know what? He's not just going to sit here and take this. He's going to become a hero no matter what. No matter what anybody says, he'll become a hero. He'll become one even greater than All Might too. As Deku would proceed to look outside through the window, as he would begin to think, how will I do that though? I'm quirkless. As this is when Bakugo and the other kids would proceed to tell him that he's nothing but a quirkless Deku. As this is when Deku would proceed to, just take that. As he would just sit there and just stay silent, knowing that he's weaker than the other kids, and if he tried to do anything about it, they would just beat him up. As Deku would decide that it would be better for him to simply just not say anything. As that's essentially what Deku would do. He would proceed to sit there and just take it. As Deku, instead of just, listening to them and crying about it like usual, this time Deku would just be thinking in his mind, having a hopeful thought. Maybe I can create support items for myself. Some gadgets. Yeah, gadgets that only I will know how to make and that only I will have. That way I can be a super, just like everybody else. That way I can have a quirk. As this is when Deku would proceed to pretty much just arrive home, as he would run up to his mom and say, Mom, I can become a hero, and I know how. As she would say, Izuku, is everything okay? What do you mean? As he would say, Mom, I can create support items for myself, and maybe I can become a hero in that way. As Inko would look towards Deku and say, huh, you know what, sweetie, that's actually not a bad idea. As Deku would say, right? He would say, Mom, I'll do it. I promise that I'm going to become good enough and smart enough to create my own support items. As Deku would begin to pretty much just, instead of training his body or a quirk of sorts, Deku would spend the next couple of years essentially hitting the books. He would proceed to just keep trying to create gadgets, just like in the way that Senku did, I guess you could say. As Deku for the next 2 years would proceed to essentially, just keep trying to get smarter. He would end up, getting to a high schooler level of intellect, about the UA level, at around the age of 6, due to Deku's, just enhanced intelligence. He doesn't have no weird intelligence quirk or anything else that will pretty much boost him. He's just naturally a smart kid. As, through determination and hard work, he would increase his knowledge. And after a while, Deku would realize that if he wants to become a hero, he can't just rely on some gadgets. He also has to learn how to fight for himself and defend himself from bullies like Bakugo. as Deku would ask his mom if she can enroll him into some martial arts classes, and Inko would tell him that sure, of course she can, as she would ask him what he wants to enroll in. And this is when Deku would tell her that he wants to take some boxing classes. And she would say, wait, sweetie, doesn't that seem a little too hard? As Deku would say, no, mom, I mean, I'm ready. It can just be beginners, and I can just be training in my stamina, or maybe, just learning how to fight. As she would say, well, I mean, okay, well, I guess I'll sign you up, Izuku. As for the next 2 years, Deku would proceed to be training in boxing, learning the basics, getting his stamina up, and increasing his strength, basically just learning how to throw a punch and a kick. He would also have sparred with a couple of the other kids who weren't permitted to use their quirks due to the fact that they're just boxing. They're not exactly having quirked battles. So this is when we're now actually going to have a time skip to about 4 years later, and at this point, Deku would have also studied karate, and he would have also studied just some normal, kickboxing, as well as, just doing his studying at the same time. At this point, Deku would be about, he would be about 10 years old. And on this particular day, Bakugo would come up to Deku as he would tell him that, he's nothing, and why does he try so hard to become a hero and to catch up to everybody else. It's not like it's going to amount to anything at the end of the day, as Deku would just kind of be ignoring Bakugo with his headphones in, as Bakugo would yank the earbuds off of Deku's ears, as he would throw an explosion right at Deku's phone, breaking it, as Deku would have had the blueprints for a gadget that he was actually working on for a long time on there, as he would then look towards Bakugo and say, Bakugo, why would you do that? As this is when Bakugo would launch an explosion off of his hands, as he would say, what are you going to do about it, Deku? As this is when Deku would have enough of his stuff. He would finally snap, as he would say, I'm tired of this, and I'm tired of you bullying me just because I don't have a quirk. It's time that somebody put you in your place, Bakugo. As Bakugo would smile and look towards Deku, as he would say, oh yeah? You can go ahead and try it, Deku. As Deku would throw a punch straight at Bakugo's nose, breaking it on impact, as Bakugo's nose would start bleeding, a lot profusely, as Bakugo would grab his nose and say, ugh, Deku, I'm gonna, as he would lunge at Deku and shoot an explosion right at Deku's face. But right as he does, Deku would sweep Bakugo's leg and he would punch him right on the ribs, as, Bakugo would fall onto the ground. And this is when Deku would lunge on top of Bakugo, as he would begin to repeatedly swing at Bakugo's face, just punching and punching and punching, as Deku would just not hold anything back, throwing his strongest punches right at Bakugo's face. As this is when the teacher would come in and yank Deku off of Bakugo, as they would say, that's enough. And this is when Deku would proceed to essentially tell them that he started it, as everybody in the cafeteria would say that Bakugo was just defending himself, since they were all terrified of him, and Deku would end up getting in trouble for this. As Deku would get suspended for 2 weeks, and Inko would be upset at Deku, but after Deku explains what had really gone on, she would understand why he did what he did, as he would tell her that Bakugo exploded his phone, as Inko would call Mitsuki and tell her that, her son needs to apologize, and she needs to have that money back for that phone, as it was very expensive. As Mitsuki would basically just say that, oh, it was Deku's fault, and that he started it, that he was just defending himself. As Inko would say that that's not true, that the other kids were lying, and that Bakugo has been bullying Deku for years. As, she would say, well, I don't have any proof. As Inko would say, oh, you want proof? You want proof? And she would say, I'll be over in 5 minutes. As this is when she would hang up and instantly tell Deku to grab his stuff. As they would go over to Bakugo's house, who's at this current moment having an ice pack on his cheek and laying down on the couch. As he would have also had some bandages on his nose since it was broken. And this is when they would arrive at Mitsuki's house. And she would say, alright, where's the proof? As this is when Inko would tell Deku to take his shirt off. As this is when Deku would take it off, and it would reveal a bunch of explosion and burn marks from Bakugo. As she would say, how do you explain this? As Mitsuki would say, I had no idea. As Inko would say, oh, well, you had no idea? Well, all these years, your son has been belittling and bullying my kid. Do you think that's okay? I could have your son thrown in jail right now if I wanted to, right? But this entire time, the only reason that I haven't done that is because Deku has told me not to. He said, leave it alone. He'll handle it someday. He said, someday when he becomes a hero, he'll take him down the proper way. But I'm getting real tired of this, Mitsuki, and if you don't control your brat, then I'm gonna have to do something about it myself. as Mitsuki would tell Inko to calm down and that she'll pay her whatever she needs for that phone. As Inko would say, oh no, this is way beyond that. Your son has gone too far this time. Izuku has never done anything to him. All he's done is want to become a hero and stay out of his way. As Mitsuki would say, don't take it too far. And she would say, how about this? I'll write you a check for $20,000. As this is when Inko would proceed to stay quiet, and she would look towards Deku. She would say, is this okay with you, Izuku? As Izuku would brighten up and say, Mom, that's perfect. As Mitsuki would write the check up, seeing that Bakugo's family is pretty well off, as she would write up the check for Inko, and Inko would go home. After this, she would tell Mitsuki that she better keep her child away from Deku. As after this, Mitsuki would heavily scold Bakugo, telling him that if he ever gets near Deku again, that he's gonna suffer bad at home. As Bakugo would get terrified of his mom, who pretty much tells him that she will beat him if he does something like that ever again. As Bakugo would say, yeah, sorry mom. As this is when, we would have Deku and Inko go home. As, for the next following years, Deku would just proceed to continue his training. And about 1 month from now, this is when Deku would finally invent something that would have actually worked. His rocket boots. He finally would have done it. He finally would have created the rocket boots. It's incredible. At this point, Deku's only about 10 years old, and he would have already created an amazing support gadget. Rocket boots that are fully functioning, and by this point, Deku would have continued to basically just perform upgrades on it for the next following years, basically perfecting them, and he would have basically just continued to work on other things, such as his hero costume and other small gadgets that are not really that crazy, but things that he decided that, might help him along the way, such as, just improvements to the rocket boots. He would have pretty much just given himself a little bit of a rough draft to what his costume could be like. And at this point, he would have pretty much created the same costume that Syndrome did at the first movie of The Incredibles. And this is when we're actually going to have a time skip to when Deku's about 15 years old, or around the original canon, whatever you guys think it is, 14, 15, I don't really mind. Anyways, this is when Deku would proceed to basically just be walking home one day after, the teacher had done his little speech about how everybody wants to become a hero, as Deku would be walking through the alleyway, as this is when, the sludge villain would proceed to jump up at Deku, as she would tell Deku that, he would grab onto Deku, taking his body over, and Deku would proceed to think that, is this the end? Is it over? As this is when All Might would appear out of nowhere, throwing a Texas Smash! As this is when Deku would be thrown out of the sludge villain, as he would wake up minutes later, only to see his idol, his hero, All Might, as he would run up to All Might, telling him if he could please give him his autograph. As All Might would do it, and he would then tell Deku that he has to go off somewhere. As Deku would say, wait, All Might, I need to ask you something. As this one All Might would say, no time, kid. I have to go off to do some other hero work. As this is when Deku would say, please, I need to ask you something. As this is when All Might would say, no time, kid. You're getting on my last nerve. As this is when Deku would say, right. As this is when All Might would proceed to get ready to jump off. But right as he does, Deku would grab onto his leg just like he does in the original, and he would proceed to be flying through the air with All Might, as All Might would try to throw Deku off of him, but Deku would be holding on way tighter than Cannon, so All Might wouldn't have been able to. And this is when they would land on the building, as Deku would see All Might's small form, as this is when All Might would proceed to essentially tell Deku that, he can't become a hero because, actually, no. Scratch that. I don't want this version of Deku to actually know of All Might's weakness. I want to have a couple of the events in this story change a little bit. Let's switch things up a little bit. Anyways, let's go back to right when All Might saved Deku. Sorry for, wasting your guys' time with that. But anyways, yeah, scratch what I just said. This is when All Might would proceed to arrive, and he would tell Deku that he doesn't have time. As Deku would proceed to say, wait, I need to know something. As All Might would turn around and say, alright kid, you have 1 minute. As Deku would say, is it possible for me to become a hero, even if I don't have a quirk? As All Might would say, I'm sorry kid, but that's impossible. You'll never be able to become a hero without a quirk. You'll just be a nuisance to everybody else, and you'll end up winding up getting killed or hurt. And that's not exactly something that you would want for yourself, is it now? As Deku would look towards All Might and say, no. As this is when All Might would proceed to look at Deku, as he would say, right. Now, go off somewhere. As he would say, without a quirk, you can't be anything in this world, kid. As this is when All Might would jump off, and Deku would say, oh. As Deku would walk home. In this version of events, since Deku would have never grabbed onto All Might's leg, there would have never been no grabbing of All Might and pretty much dropping the sludge villain, as that entire thing would have pretty much been prevented altogether. As this one, we would now have a couple of different things happening in this version, however. See, the difference here being that as soon as Deku gets home, instead of knowing of All Might's secret quirk or any of that stuff, he would arrive home to see his room filled with nothing but All Might collectibles, posters, his computer wallpaper. He would arrive home as he would proceed to rip off the poster, as he would think, you can't trust anybody, not even your heroes. I'm gonna prove him wrong. I'm gonna become a hero without a quirk. And when I can become a hero without a quirk, everybody will be a hero. And then, nobody will be. As Deku would proceed to basically spend the next 10 months working on a gadget that he's essentially going to be using for the entrance exam. As for the next 10 months, Deku would have ended up developing the same gadget that Syndrome has and every single other, thing that Syndrome has in the original Incredible movie, such as the costume, the rocket boots, the zero-pointer gravity object little gauntlet that he has, and the bombs. He would have also been working on a prototype to create giant robots that cost hundreds of dollars. But at this point, Deku would have, figured out that maybe he could sell some of his lesser inventions to make a lot of money for himself. As the reason that Deku wants to become a hero is obviously never been for the money. But in this version of events, since Deku at this point would have had a brilliant mind, he would have definitely been able to, create some gadgets, I believe. And he would have been able to, sell them on the market. As Deku would have ended up, creating his own company known as Syndrome Tech. Or no, Chronos. As he would basically sell things. And at this point, Deku and Inko would basically be living in an upscale neighborhood. As this would have actually happened, let's say 2 years ago when Deku was 13. And this is when we would now have Deku essentially working in his facility. As this is when we would have Deku essentially getting ready for, the last couple of days until the UA entrance exam. As he would file in his form and ask if he could use support items for, the test. As they would allow it, as, Deku was quirkless after all. As Deku would proceed to take the entrance exam using his support items and nothing but that, using nothing but his control remote as well as his rocket boots. As he would arrive wearing nothing but some joggers and a tank top. As this is when Deku would rush on in there, as he would proceed to take the written exam sitting right next to Bakugo. As Bakugo would give Deku a death stare, telling him that, he needs to stay out of his way. Quirkless Izuku. As he would proceed to basically just leave the room. And this is when Deku would proceed to ace the test. He would get every single one of the answers right, as he would, wind up going outside. And when he's outside, he would proceed to start walking up towards the front, as a boy with blue hair would walk up to him and tell him that he doesn't need to go over there and distract that girl. As Deku would say, what are you talking about? I wasn't going to go distract anybody. As Ida would say, yes you were. You were going to go try to distract that. As Deku would say, stop right there. Look, I don't know who you are or what little self-righteousness thing you believe you have, but you need to get out of my way. I'm just here to take the test and get to the front. Now leave me alone. As Ida would just stand there in silence, as he would say, well, just be respectful of your classmates. As he would say, I apologize for what I said. As he would then basically just leave. As Deku would walk up to the front, and he would proceed to be stretching. As this is when pretty much the gates would open, as it would be said, 3, 2, 1, go! As they would have essentially let loose. And Deku would have used his rocket boots to fly in there before anybody else could have. As Deku would rush on over to one of the robots, pretty much kicking it and destroying it upon impact. as Deku would proceed to basically just rush around, and he would proceed to use his flight as well as his 0 point energy to pretty much pick robots off of the ground and just proceed to smash them on the ground, as this is essentially what Deku would have proceeded to do, just smashing and destroying robots, as that's what Deku would always practice on. He would practice with fighting little prototype robots that he would create for military purposes, which he does actually sell for the highest bidding. And, Deku would have basically been the one with the most experience here, as by the end of everything, Deku would have accumulated a total of 169 points, as Deku would have essentially just been chilling there, sitting down on top of a roof, thinking that should have definitely been enough to pass. As this is when a giant robot would appear out of nowhere, as it would threaten to crush a girl that he would see from afar, using one of his scanner detectors that he pretty much invented on his his wrist, or his syndrome, his little watch gadget thing, that thing, as he would see over there, and he would proceed to basically fly over to Uraraka, as he would pick her up with one arm and sweep her up like a total badass, as he would proceed to point his 0 point energy towards the robot, and he would say, "I am Syndrome," as he would pick the robot and smash it on its head, as the robot would fall down instantly, and Deku would proceed to take Uraraka to Recovery Girl to help heal herself up, as she would thank Deku, and Deku would say that it's not necessary, as Deku would proceed to basically walk off away from there. And this is when Deku would proceed to essentially go home, as this is when Deku would proceed to basically just wait for the next couple of days to see when his letter would come in and to see if he got in, as he knows that he definitely did. He got more points than anybody by a landslide, and he definitely passed that written portion, as it was almost the easiest test he'd ever taken, as at this point Deku would have definitely been at Syndrome's level of intellect, and he would definitely be just as intelligent as him. As this is when we would now have it to where Deku gets his letter, and he would have All Might be the one who tells him that he was accepted. As soon as All Might tells him that he's in, Deku would grab the devices. He would destroy it with nothing but its bare hands, as Deku would look towards that device and just say one word: All Might. As this is when Deku would proceed to basically go to UA on his first day to class, as his mom would tell him good luck, and Deku would say, "Yeah, thanks," as he would walk off inside, as Deku would proceed to basically walk on in there, as he would take a seat right in the front, towards the middle, as right next to him, he would have a very smart girl sitting next to him. This girl being by the name of Momo Yaoyorozu, as she would look towards Deku and ask him what his name is, as Deku would say his name is Izuku Midoriya, and she would introduce herself as Momo Yaoyorozu. And this is when Deku would essentially proceed to say, "That's a very nice name." As everybody else would get seated down, and they'd proceed to talk for a little bit, as Deku would say that she is actually very beautiful, as Momo would begin to blush, seeing as that's just something she would do. And this is when Aizawa, right after Deku said that, would proceed to tell them all to go get changed, as everybody would proceed to basically go get changed into the room. And this is when Bakugo for the first time would see Deku's physique, as Deku would be 2 times more ripped than Bakugo, seeing that he trained harder on his body, and he would have definitely learned how to fight even way beyond Bakugo's level, surpassing him by a landslide. And this is when we would now essentially have Deku basically finishing up getting changed, as Kirishima would have pointed out that, Deku was extremely ripped. He would say, "What do you do, man?" As Deku would tell Kirishima that, he doesn't really do much. He kind of just trained ever since he was a young kid. As Kirishima would say, "How young?" As Deku would say that he trained since he was about 4 years old, 4.5. As Kirishima would say, "That's manly." As they would go outside, and Deku would then be thrown the ball, as Aizawa would tell him to throw it, seeing as he got the most points. And Aizawa would then try to turn off Izuku's quirk, as Deku would throw the ball with the 0 point with, actually no, he wouldn't have that on him right now. He would get about 200 meters, 137 meters, with nothing but his bare physical strength. As Deku would definitely not get the greatest score of all time, but it would definitely be something that is way beyond the levels of any normal human who would have thrown the ball themselves. As this is when we would now have, everybody else with the ball, and this is when Aizawa would proceed to ask Deku what his quirk is, as he hasn't seen him use it up to this point. As at this point, they would have essentially done the smashing of the machine, as after all this time of training, Deku would have broken it with nothing but his bare grip strength, using his strength to the max, as he would have shattered the machine. And this is when Deku would proceed to essentially, just decide on a couple of things that he's going to be doing. As, this is when Deku would proceed to, just tell Aizawa that, well, he's quirkless. As Aizawa and the rest of the class would say, what? You're quirkless? And Bakugo would just kind of, just chuckle to himself as he would say, yeah, he's a quirkless Deku. He has no power at all. He's so defenseless. I don't even know why you guys even let him in here. It's not like he can get that far without a quirk. As Aizawa would say, tell Bakugo to be quiet, as he would say that he ended up surpassing him in the exam, so he should show a little more respect. As Bakugo would grudge his, he would proceed to grit his teeth as he would say, ugh. And this is when Deku would proceed to basically just leave. As soon as Deku would arrive home, he would proceed to be thinking of nothing but All Might, as he would have actually seen All Might walking through the halls. And this is when Deku would begin to think, these gadgets may be useful, and I may be able to take on All Might with nothing but a 0-pointer energy, but I'll never have a quirk. I'll never be a super, or a real one at that, at least. As he would begin to, for the next couple of hours, begin to hatch a plan. He would begin to wonder if there's any possible way that he can, change his genetic makeup. Maybe take a quirk. As this is a project that Deku's actually going to be working on, which will be basically titled Quirk. As that's essentially what Deku would decide to name the project. And this is when Deku would proceed to basically just have this in the works. As you guys should definitely keep this in mind for part 2 and for what's going to happen down in that line. Now, this is when we would now have Deku arrive back to school. As the very next day, Deku would have basically had the normal, some normal schooling. As this is when they would get to the last class, as Deku would essentially just be chilling there. As this is when All Might would arrive and say that he is here, walking through the door like a normal person. As Deku would not be able to stand the sight of All Might, he would grit his teeth and start balling up his fists so tight that he would start bleeding. As he would look towards All Might, and his hatred towards him would just begin to buster up. As this is when All Might would proceed to tell them all to get suited up. And this is when Deku would stare down at All Might. As All Might would see that kid that he had basically, said that he couldn't become a hero was in UA. As he would then look towards Deku and give him a smile, giving him a thumbs up, as he would tell him, well, looks like you were able to make it after all, quirkless kid. Or something like that. Something that All Might would say. He would say Midoriya. As, this is when Deku would proceed to, scoff at that notion. And he would walk off over to the changing room. As Deku would proceed to put on Syndrome's iconic hero suit, quote unquote. As Deku would have the same design as Syndrome. But, obviously his hair would be green. And he would have a different look. Actually being on the fit side. Not, Syndrome's chubbier nature, I guess you could say. Now, this is when Deku would proceed to essentially walk out, as the rest of the class would see what Deku's hero costume looked like. As they would say that his costume makes him look incredible. He looks like a total badass. As Kirishima would tell him that his costume is so manly. As this is when Deku would basically just start smiling and laughing a bit. As he would proceed to basically be talking amongst his peers. As this is when All Might would proceed to basically tell everybody their team. As he would tell Deku that he's with a team with a girl named Uraraka, who basically has a very useful quirk in Deku's opinion. She has the ability to manually turn off people's gravity. That's something that Deku had to create a gadget for, but she has that ability off nothing but just being born with it. As Deku would look towards her and think that she'll definitely be an asset and a great hero when she grows up. And she would smile towards her and tell her that, he can't wait to get started. As they would proceed to basically be told by All Might to go to their stations, as Deku would pass by All Might and say whatever. And this is when All Might would be wondering why this kid has such a grudge towards him. As he would then think back to what he told him, and this is when he would realize why it's like this. As All Might would basically try to ask Deku for forgiveness, but this is when Deku would basically... All Might would proceed to essentially grab Deku's shoulders. He would say, hey, Midoriya, I'm sorry. As Deku would grab All Might's hand, as he would give him a death stare and tell him to get his filthy hand off of him. As the rest of the class would look at what Deku just said, as Bakugo would say, "You better have some respect for him, huh? That's the #1 hero you're speaking to." As All Might would say, "No, young Katsuki Bakugo, it's all right." As Deku would proceed to say, damn right, it's all right." As he would proceed to walk off with Araka, and he would proceed to look towards Bakugo, telling him that he's fine, that he's gonna get what he deserves. As this is when Deku would proceed to go on in there with Araka, as they would proceed to basically just start, talking about a plan. As Deku would have created a very interesting one at that. He would have told Araka to basically make herself weightless. And she would say, "What? Why?" As Deku would say that he has rocket boots. It's one of his many gadgets. As he would tell her, "Oh, okay." And she would make herself be weightless. And this is when Deku would grab onto Araka, as he would activate his rocket boots and he would proceed to fly them up. As he would start scouting the area using his scanners that Syndrome has to basically look around the area, locating the bomb and where Bakugo and Ida are. As this is when Deku would tell Araka that their plan is essentially going to be that Deku's going to be the distraction and Araka is going to be, basically taking on Ida one-on-one. Now, Deku would say this plan knowing that Araka would ultimately fail if she went up against Ida, but this is because Deku wanted to actually have his one-on-one time with Bakugo and get back at him for all those years that he had pretty much just belittled him and treated him like garbage. As this is when Bakugo would proceed to rush through the building saying, "Deku!" As Deku would basically just be walking up there nonchalantly. As Bakugo would rush towards Deku, basically shooting an explosion right at Deku's face. As Deku would dodge and point his finger right at Bakugo, stopping him completely. As Bakugo wouldn't be able to move and say, What is this?" As he wouldn't be able to do anything. As this is when Deku would proceed to point his finger up and down, as he would have Bakugo's body just ricochet off the top and bottom of the building, as he would continue to hit Bakugo like that until All Might would proceed to say, "That's enough! That's enough, Midoriya!" As Deku would stop and an unconscious and bloody Bakugo would be laying there. As Deku would proceed to essentially go up to the bomb room, as Uraraka at this point would have already been defeated by Ida. As Deku would rush on into the building before Ida could even try to run at Deku, he would proceed to point his 0-pointer straight at Ida as he would smash him into the wall, throwing him straight through one of the walls and into the next room over. As Deku would walk up to the bomb and touch it, as he would pick up Uraraka and he would proceed to ask her if she's okay. And she would say, "Yeah, I'm fine." As this is when Deku would proceed to give her a light smile, telling her that, she did great. As Uraraka would, just smile back, saying that, yeah, she did what she could after all. As All Might would begrudgingly say, heroes win. As this is when we would now have a couple of different things happening. See, this is when Deku would proceed to essentially just walk out of there, as before he could actually get out, All Might would grab Deku's shoulder, asking him if he could have a word with him tomorrow before class. As Deku would say, sure, he'll be there. As, the very next day would arrive, and when All Might was expecting Deku would have just ditched. He would have not reported at all, gone straight to class, and would have just left All Might waiting there like an idiot. As All Might would report to class, and he would then, arrive there quickly. As he would look at Deku and tell him, "Why didn't you show up, young Midoriya?" As Deku would say, I didn't really feel like it. As, this is when, All Might would say, "Kid, I'm starting to get real sick and tired of the way that you've been acting lately. You need to get your stuff together before I expel you." As Deku would get up in All Might's face and say, "Do it. Expel this quirkless kid. It's not like anybody will care anyways. I'm quirkless after all, right? I can't make it as a hero." As All Might would just have those words ring in his head, the same words that he would have told Deku such a long time ago. As he would then look towards Deku, would not be able to utter anything. He wouldn't be able to say a word towards the kid whose dreams he knows he crushed. As Deku would look towards All Might and say, "That's what I thought." As he would say, "All right then." As All Might would just look straight at Deku, as he would say, "Nothing." And this is when Deku would proceed to take a seat, as they would be informed about the USJ that will be happening in about 2 weeks from now. As for about 2 weeks, they would just do normal hero combat and just normal hero studies, as they would learn about, basic school stuff. But on the days that Deku's not in school, and, pretty much his after school, he would have been working on Project Quirk. As at this point, Deku would have actually taken a piece of All Might's hair, and you guys know where I'm going with this. Deku at this point would have basically been studying All Might's genetic makeup. What makes All Might's quirk a quirk? He would have also been studying, how quirks ended up developing. And when he ended up studying All Might's quirk, he would have seen something weird. It's not normal. It's not like any other quirks that's ever been around. As, Deku would notice that something about All Might's quirk is just not normal. It's so weird. As Deku would try to create his own replica of it, and he would begin to create nothing but failures of it. He would try to create a fabricated quirk, something that works essentially just like All Might's quirk and would give him the enhanced strength, speed, perception, everything that All Might has. Is that's essentially what Deku would have been working on, but up until now, everything would fail. And this is when we would now actually just pretty much have Deku failing and failing over and over until we would now have the day of the USJ. Now, on the day of the USJ, a couple of things would actually be changing, however. See, this time, before they even take a step inside, Deku would have his scanners just go throughout the entirety of what is, basically the inside of the USJ. As he would ask Aizawa if there's supposed to be that many people in there. As Aizawa would ask, what does he mean? As he would say, there's only supposed to be 3 in there. As Deku would say, yeah, that's what I thought. That's why I'm asking, and that's why it seems so weird. See, my scanners indicate that there's over 100 people in there. As Aizawa would say, what? It's impossible. And this was right as they were about to go inside, as Aizawa would tell everybody to stop, telling them all to wait out here. As this is when Aizawa would call for backup. As a couple of the heroes, including All Might, would proceed to show up on the scene. And instead of having the USJ go like it did in canon, we would actually have a different turn of events. See, this version of Deku would not be the same Deku we know and love in canon. This one would have had his hopes and dreams crushed by All Might. And just being around All Might as in a whole just makes Deku angry. He hates the sight of him. So when he saw All Might go in there, Deku was deterred from wanting to go in there and help save everything. And with the inclusion of the rest of the heroes, they would have ended up capturing every single villain that was present, including Shigaraki and Kurogiri. And this is going to set us up for something that's going to happen in the future. Just wait and see, guys. Just wait and see. Now, this is when we would now have basically that entire USJ attack go by normal, and seeing as, none of the students actually got hurt, the heroes would have actually been able to put that under wraps, seeing that nothing was really happened, and they wouldn't actually end up having a 1-week break. So school would proceed just like normal, and this would mean less time for Deku to try to, create his fake quirk, I guess you could say. As, this would not pose that great of a thing for Deku. As they would then be informed about the UA Sports Festival, as this is when we would now get onto the bigger stuff. Now, Deku would of course put in his request to essentially use the gadgets, and this is when Deku would proceed to essentially just, like I had already stated, put in his request to see if he can use these gadgets that everybody, since he doesn't have a quirk. As they would proceed to accept it, and on the day of the UA Sports Festival, Deku would proceed to go up there and give a speech that pretty much inspires all people without quirks, telling everybody that his name is Izuku Midoriya, and he will be the first quirkless hero, and that on top of that, he's going to be winning this entire thing, as everybody would not know how to feel about this, and the crowd would just go silent, as quirkless people all around the world would just be seeing as Deku just declared that he would win, and they would all just be thinking that he doesn't stand a chance. But as soon as the race is announced, Deku would have essentially used his rocket boots to basically fly on out of there, and he would have ended up getting first place, going off before Todoroki could even use his ice quirk, and surpassing Bakugo and Todoroki in terms of speed and overall precision in terms of dodging the robots and flying over the landmines and every other obstacle that would have been around. As Deku would have also laid a couple of his own landmines, similar to the one that he, did with Mr. Incredible, except on a much smaller scale, as he doesn't exactly want to obliterate his classmates. Now, This is when we would then have, Deku essentially being the winner and being awarded the 10 million points, as they would now then announce the cavalry battle, as this is when Deku would proceed to meet somebody. This being Mei Hatsume. She would proceed to essentially be there for Deku and ask him if he could be there, and show off her babies. As Deku would ask, what does she mean by that? As she would proceed to tell Deku about her inventions. As soon as Deku would look at Mei, his eyes would light up. He would proceed to look at her and say, wow, this is some impressive work. You managed to create your own version of my rocket boots. Obviously less developed, but these are incredible. These are way better than the ones that I created at first. As Mei would say, really? And Deku would say, of course, you're amazing. As Mei and Deku would proceed to just be talking amongst themselves. And this is when Araraka would walk up to Deku, telling him that, she would like to be on a team with him. As Deku would proceed to basically just walk up to Shinso, as he would ask him if he wants to be on his team as well. As Shinso was about to basically call on anybody else to basically brainwash them, but before he could, Deku would have essentially pretty much just asked him to be on his team without Shinso's pretty much brainwashing of any other people. As Shinso would accept, and this is when Deku's team would proceed to basically go on and turn on their 100-point headband. Now, as soon as the cavalry battle would start, this is when a lot of things would begin to happen. Seeing that Deku and Mei Hatsume both have rocket boots, Deku would decide that he would have have everybody be weightless, and they would proceed to fly up on into the air. See, they have double the power with rocket boots, and Mei and Deku could basically power themselves up, as they could basically just be there holding who's essentially Shinso up in the air. As this is when we would essentially have a lot of things actually changing. Now, a lot of people wouldn't actually try to go for Deku, seeing as he's way too far into the air, since most people couldn't do it. And Todoroki didn't want to risk, having his team forfeiting, so the rest of the teams would proceed to just go and attack each other. As Baku would have a grudge against Deku, but he would decide that it's better off for him to just kind of leave him alone. Now, this is when we would now pretty much have Deku just going on to win the cavalry battle, as there would really be no need for them to pretty much go into combat with anybody else, seeing as they don't really have to. And everybody in the crowd would have pretty much just started booing Deku, saying that this is so boring. The person with the most amount of points would have essentially just pretty much just hit out. That's not like something that a hero would do. As, a couple of things would start changing from here on out. Now, this is when we would have Deku essentially proceed to basically just walk on out of there, as his entire team would have pretty much won. And this is when we would now have Deku basically going up to the cavalry battle. Nope, not cavalry battle. He would go up to basically have the normal battles, as the bracket would go just like it did in canon, except his fight with Shinso. Seeing that he now knows what Shinso's quirk is, Shinso would have actually been at a great disadvantage, and Deku would have told him that he's not going to use any of his gadgets to make it a fair fight. As Shinso would smile, thinking that that's a pretty honorable thing to do. But before, Shinso could realize it, Deku would have rushed at him and punched him out of the arena, pretty much proceeding to beat him like a rag doll. As Deku would throw Shinso out of the arena, pretty much just slamming him onto the grass, as Shinso would be taken out, and this is when the next battle would start. This being Deku versus Todoroki. Now, as soon as Todoroki would have shot the big, geyser of ice, Deku would have rocketed out there with his rocket boots, as he would have been flying in on the air, as he would then proceed to say, "Whoa, time out!" as he would shoot his 0-point of gravity straight at Todoroki, as he would say, "You have a very impressive quirk." As Todoroki would just try to move, but he wouldn't quite be able to do anything. Deku would proceed to just basically start smiling, as he would then pick Todoroki up off the ground and throw him into the furthest wall out of the arena. As Todoroki would be, pretty much counted as out of bounds, and this is when the final battle would start. This being Bakugo versus Deku. See, this time, Deku would have decided that he's going to take a different approach to things. As soon as the battle would start, Deku would pretty much immobilize Bakugo, as he would then proceed to rush up to him, and he would start pretty much just beating him in terms of hand-to-hand combat, as he would then proceed to essentially put on these gloves that he was saving just for Bakugo. See, the gloves that he has normally, he would have essentially proceeded to take one of them off, as these would be something that he created in order for him to mock Bakugo, as this is all going according to plan. Now, this is when Deku would proceed to essentially just put on these gloves that essentially let off explosions. And Deku would proceed to rush at Bakugo, as he would proceed to hit him with a flurry of attacks. He would shoot explosion after explosion, and he would start mimicking Bakugo's movements, as he would unfreeze Bakugo. And he and Bakugo would get into a very, pretty badass hand-to-hand combat battle, which Deku would end up ultimately winning due to the fact that he just has more experience, he's stronger, and he's just more adept in terms of how to fight. As Bakugo would proceed to get overwhelmed by Deku's power and tenacity, and Deku would end up getting first place in the sports festival, being congratulated by All Might, and due to the fact that he's on the big screen, he would pretty much just put on a fake smile, saying that, being thankful to All Might. As All Might would think that, this is a sign of Deku pretty much just not having these normal things happen. As this is when we would now have a couple of different things happening. See, this is when we would now have them all return to school, as they would all pretty much be told that they pretty much have to pick the heroes which they're going to be interning at, as well as picking what they're going to be doing, what their hero name is going to be. As in terms of what Deku's going to be picking, I'm pretty sure the majority of you guys can already guess what name he's going to be having. I mean, it's right on the thumbnail. Syndrome! That's the name that Deku's, of course, going to be going with. And as for where he wants to go intern, Deku would have actually asked Nezu if he could actually intern with him, seeing that he actually thought that Nezu has one of the biggest IQs other than himself around here. As Nezu would have actually accepted, Deku's offer, and Nezu would proceed to basically just start teaching him a couple of things about what he knows of what it's like to be a hero. As Deku would have actually asked him that instead of working on some physical stuff, seeing as he knows that Nezu can't exactly help him with that, he just wants to know the ins and outs of how the hero world works. He wants to know how to quickly rise through the rankings. He wants to know things like that, small details, things that won't really be too big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. And he just wants to know basically how he can get up to the top as quickly as possible. As that's essentially all that Deku would have ended up learning during this break, with something else happening in the back, something that not a lot of other people would have expected. See, it's at this point that Deku would have actually been able to crack the code. Deku would have been able to see what makes All Might tick. He would have found out how to duplicate All Might's quirk. This being one for all. Deku would proceed to basically test out the theory for another couple of days, and this is when Deku would decide that as for how he's gonna basically, go on about things from going on from here on out, he would proceed to essentially go inside of a tube that he had created, sort of how the Green Goblin was able to inject himself with his little serum that he did. He would have basically given it to himself in the form of a gas, as he would have entered a station in which he would have basically experienced excruciating pain. His genetic makeup would start to change, and Deku would then have access to All for One. He would have successfully been able to create one of the biggest mysteries in terms of the hero world, a quirk that nobody else can, have. As Deku, upon further inspection of how the quirk works, he would have learned that this quirk is not normal. It wouldn't be something that that All Might was born with. As after checking more and doing more studies on All Might's DNA, he would have been able to realize that All Might was quirkless, just like him. And this would push Deku over the edge. He would throw things across the room with super strength like never before, as he would rip his computer off of the ground and throw it across the room, as he would begin to scream and say, as he would begin to basically start screaming that he was also quirkless, and he had the nerve, the audacity to tell somebody else that he can't become a hero just like him. He's not a hero at all. He's garbage. And this is where we're going to be ending part 1 of 2 of What If Deku Was Like Syndrome. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, as you know, it was pretty fun to make. And definitely be tuned for the next part, which will actually be dropping the day after today, as you know, you guys are going to be getting part 2 of 2, obviously. Now, before the video ends, I just want to say a couple of things. This is actually how I'm going to be making my videos from now on, and I'm just going to be doing 2-parters. The first part being like often 50 minutes, second part being about 40 to 30 minutes, as that's essentially how I'm going to be doing my series from now on. But with that being said, it's been your boy Zed, and I'm out.